everyone. Lovely to see you all. Thank you and welcome to an evening in conversation with Michael Mansfield, KC and Michael Sheen. And we're about to welcome to the stage. So put your hands together and have a big applause for Michael Sheen and Michael Mansfield.
I took the shortcut. Someone was showboating at the front there. I can see how this is going to go.
We all good? How are you all feeling?
What?
You feeling good?
It was so lovely out there, we nearly went off to the pub. Whilst we were waiting for you.
Both men here need no introduction, but I'm going to give you a quick reminder. Nevertheless, Michael Mansfield has been described as the king of human rights by Legal 500 due to his outstanding work for more than 50 years and has been involved in some of the biggest miscarriages of justice. Here are just some of his cases. Stephen Lawrence, Bloody Sunday, Guildford 4, Birmingham 6, Hillsborough, the inquest of Grenfell, the inquest of Dodi Al-Fayed and Princess Diana, Jill Dando, and of course the notable Cardiff cases of the Cardiff 5, the Cardiff 3, Newsagent 3, and Mahmood Matan. Matan was in fact the story that brought us together because I interviewed Michael for my Matan podcast.
Certainly did. Okay, so not everybody knows, but everybody in here will know, but I suspect what it is.
Thank you. And Michael Sheen is an actor, a humanitarian, a political activist, and earlier this year made his directorial debut, The Way, on BBC One. Sam Mendes has described him as a stage creature and said his talent was his Welsh roots. Well, amen to that. To remind us of some of Michael's recent credits, we have The Way, Nye at the National, Good Omens, Best Interests, The Sandman, and Prodigal Son. You've also played a lot of real-life characters as well. Chris Tarrant in Quiz, which is my mum's favourite. Brian Clough in The Damned United. Kenneth Williams in Fantabuloso, which is my favourite. David Frost in Frost Nixon. Dr. William H. Masters in Masters of Sex. And Tony Blair with 3 portrayals, The Deal, The Special Relationship, and The Queen. What was your favourite?
When Robert Lindsay played him.
Good answer, good answer. Have I missed any of your real-life portrayals there?
I played H.G. Wells once.
Oh, okay.
And
Eric? Looking for Eric? Have you put that one in?
No, I didn't do that one. We were talking about, I played Barrister David Sherborne in the thing about Rebecca Vardy and Colleen Rooney.
Yes.
So we were talking about that, and I will be seen on screens as Prince Andrew in 2 weeks' time.
Yes. Now I haven't forgot that. I've got a question for you later on.
Okay.
So prepare yourself. So the idea for this talk was conceived out of my last in conversation with Michael Mansfield in January at the Cardiff Journalism School, and the subject of that talk was the people in power and what ordinary people can do. And simultaneously, at the same time that we were having that talk, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, the drama had come out, and had really sort of gripped the nation and got everyone talking. And it really showed how political dramas that were raising awareness of social causes and legal cases that had got a bit stuck in the system, showed that actually what drama could do and the power of drama to bring those cases to life. Not only that, but there was The Way a month later. It was fictional, but it felt all too real. A Welsh family becoming refugees, mirroring the life of many millions across the world, tackled social issues, job losses by privatisation, and it showed social campaigning on our screens. So, these kind of dramas, they're not new concepts, all the way from Cathy Come Home by Ken Loach. Political dramas have always found a way to get the nation talking and be in the forefront of the public's minds. But I'd say that the recent wave of dramas have come at a time where, as you've said, Michael, before, the public have just had enough. and it's kept political failures and public discontent in the spotlight. So we decided to bring two famous crusaders against social injustice together to have a conversation.
Great idea. We've already had it.
Yeah. I was going to say, I can't wait till they show up. I'd love to hear that. Sounds great.
So let's start with Mr. Bates versus the post office. Michael, I'm going to come to you first. Obviously, we've had a previous conversation about that. It really struck a chord with you, and I remember you saying that what Mr. Bates had done is what you had been trying to do the whole of your career.
Yeah, I think what it is that until you get inside something, a character, as you know, a case, until you're right inside the people who are involved and you understand the odds that you face, the difficulties, until that moment comes, a kind of almost the road to Damascus, a certain point in, you suddenly realize how devastating it was. And that particular program reminded me, in other words, it's not new. There is a history of visualization. I don't know if you all remember, they've all gone now, but they're creeping back slowly. Just TV, Rough Justice, Trial and Error. These were programs back in the 80s and the 90s. And of course, given my age, I obviously do remember them, and I'm in some of them. And the fact is, they were visualizing for you what's going wrong in the system. So people would watch a lot, and they make a difference. They actually get things, until the Lord Chief Justice of the day, Lord Justice Taylor, said, trial by television, we're not having this, you know. And so all those companies faded away, so investigative journalism faded away. And we've been waiting for somebody to step in and fill the gap. And I think this is where TV drama's doing that. And the other one I just wanted to cite, very important for me anyway, I don't know, those of you who saw Jimmy McGovern's play on Hillsborough. He was broadcasting the iniquity long before it actually reached the courts, in a bit of the same way that Bate and versus the Post Office did at the beginning of this year. Sorry, a bit of a long answer.
No, it's a good answer. Michael, did you watch the drama, and what were your thoughts?
I did. Well, I mean, the story is outrageous, isn't it? I mean, it's just... There's a scene very, very early on in the first episode where Monica Dolan, who's playing Jo, you see her in front of her screen in her post office, and she's talking on a helpline, and she says, you know, there's something not right here, and what do I need to do? I don't understand this stuff. And we watch the helpline tell her, and we watch the amount that it says she's out by, you know, 35. Double. And she's, so we're in real time, to Michael's point, we're in the character who is going through it. It's one thing to read what happens to someone, but when you actually sit there in your living room and you're invited to be that person going through that experience, and something so clear cut is put there, you see the injustice of it. And in that scene at the very beginning there, I thought, well, don't need to see anymore. Yeah. Like I'm already outraged. I'm moved for her. You know, even if someone just told you what that scene was, you'd feel the outrage of it, but you see her panic and her, you know, and suddenly it becomes very human, doesn't it? And so the power of that is extraordinary, and the fact that that scene comes so early on in the piece, sort of encapsulated it all. And I was amazed. I was sort of reading up on the sort of stuff we're going to be talking about, and I think it was watched by 14 million people. So it was the most watched show. It might be more by now. But it was, the statistic I read, 14 million people, which at the moment I think is about 20% of the country. And I look back at when Kathy Come Home was on in 1966. It's part of a series called the Wednesday Play that was on at the time. And that got 12 million viewers. But at that time, that was a quarter of the population of Great Britain. So it's kind of interesting, in these sort of bookmarks, you know, 12 million, 14 million, 20% of the country, 25% of the country. And the power of that, of people all coming together, watching something, being outraged by it, and it having an effect. Now, the thing Ken Loach said about Kathy Come Home, I mean, it's become this sort of totemic thing, this sort of, everyone refers to that as being the thing that created so much change. And Ken Loach said that for all its influence and for all it got people talking. He said, I don't think it really changed anything. I don't think it changed very much. He said, whether that's true or not, I don't know, but he said that. And of course, the thing about Mr. Bates versus the Post Office was that regardless of how many people watched it, obviously it's because partly of how many people watched it, but it created actual change. It wasn't just a cultural discussion. It wasn't, you know, a talking point in lots of newspapers and opinion columns, or even, you know, everyone talking about it at home and at work and stuff like that. It actually, like the government did a mass exoneration of, what was it, 900 people or something, and compensation. I mean, it actually changed things. And that's very rare. When you do look back at some of the key sort of TV and film in this sort of genre, you know, I was looking back and going, right, okay, what are the things? Well, Cathy Come Home, okay, there was the same year that Cathy Come Home came out, 1966, The War Game happened, Peter Watkins' The War Game. Didn't actually get shown on television until 1985 because it was deemed too scary for people to watch. It was about nuclear war and sort of drama documentary style thing. Boys from the Black Stuff. Now that was something that came out when I think I was probably about 12, 13, and I can remember that, and that having a big effect on people, and the character that Bernard Hill played, Yosser Hughes, became this sort of totemic character, and that seemed to reflect what was going on in the country at the time, a certain thing that was going on in the country about unemployment. And then other things, you know, that have happened on the threads. There's you know, a number of things that have gone on. Jimmy's film. Hillsborough, you know, In the Name of the Father.
That's had a carry through, because I think I'm a firm believer that things do change. They don't always change under your noses, and you may have to wait a little while, and you may not recognize it when it first happens. But one of the biggest, I'm watching closely to make sure it happens. Coming out of Hillsborough, you wouldn't think you need to pass legislation about the duty of candor. In other words, you've got to have a statute that says you must tell the truth. But that's actually what the Hillsborough families campaign for. There's only one area where there is a duty of candor at the moment, it's the National Health Service. They have to tell the truth, but nobody else has to tell the truth, which of course is the theme, one of the moral values or immoral values that goes through Hillsborough and all the other ones I've just mentioned, including Grenfell next week. And Starmer has said that there are two things that he wants to change in terms of the system, the only two things that any of the parties actually cottoned onto. One is the duty of candor. It has got to be enforced, because clearly, at all levels, as you'll see next week, people have lied, and there is corruption at every level. Therefore, you're going to have a statute, and then, of course, you've got to enforce it, and then you've got all of those problems, but at least he's got the concept, which has been there since something called the Nolan Principles back in the 1990s. So I personally think, you know, drama, visualization, and the need to, as it were, monitor change is extremely important.
Michael, do you think we'll see more of these dramas developing and coming up over the next couple of years?
I think there's less of it at the moment, to be honest, than there was. I don't think there's more of it. I think there's less of it. It's harder to get that sort of stuff on. But since Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, now everything is like, well, this is going to be the next Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, isn't it? And so there's a lot of that kind of talk. So there'll probably be a little bit more support for that kind of work. But my worry is that actually we have less of that kind of political stuff and about real life issues. You know, the danger is that it all starts to become very samey, what's on television. And then something like Mr. Bates comes on and has this extraordinary effect. And then people are looking for the next one of those. I mean, our show, The Way, in some ways suffered from the Mr. Bates effect, because it kind of, you know, our story was never meant to be about a sort of a drama doc about what was going on at the steelworks. What happened at the steelworks was the kind of catalyst for something that was actually a bit more of a sort of fantastical thing, a sort of fantasia thing. But because of what had happened, I mean, what happened was that just before, 2 weeks before The Way came on television, essentially there was an announcement that what we were talking about in our show was actually going to happen. And suddenly everyone kind of framed what our show was around that. And because of the effect that Mr. Bates had very recently, I think the powers that be got very scared that this was going to do a similar thing and wanted to get ahead of it. And so, I mean, I woke up one day and found that the Minister for Trade was having a go at me in an open letter on the front page of the, right-wing press. It's like, what? Sorry, what? I mean, nobody's seen it yet. How can I have got it wrong? And it became clear, and this is what I think is interesting, it became clear that a group of people had got together to come up with a kind of a plan of how to deal with this. So it shows how much they were rattled. And that's, I think, politicians, press, and a few other interested parties, I think clearly had kind of, as a result of what had happened with Mr. Bates, were very much on the alert for it happening again. Now that's interesting. Yeah. I think that's fascinating. So on the one, I think there's probably going to be a tension between creatives wanting to do more of it because of the Mr. Bates effect, and the powers that be going, oh, no, none of that, thank you. So there's an interesting tension there, and then and then it'll probably go back to how it was before, where none of it comes through anymore.
What was your intention with The Way? Because obviously you worked with the documentary filmmaker Adam Curtis. Because it was fictional, but it felt all too real, didn't it? You saw, you showed the refugee plight and social issues. What was your intention?
Well, of course, one of the things that we worked on it for many, many years beforehand, developing it, and we were sort of heading into production when the COVID stuff happened, so it got sort of put off. So it ended up developing over a much longer period of time. And what we were a bit worried by, James Graham, who is sort of in some ways in that tradition of people like Jimmy McGovern and Alan Bleasdale, and so me, James, Adam, and Bethan, who's here, we developed the story. But one of the things that we noticed that was a bit disconcerting was whenever we sort of came up with something that we thought was a bit, that's a bit outlandish, no one's going to believe that, then it sort of happened. And this has continued since it's been on. So, we wrote a piece where there's a kind of a tragic death happens, and as a result of that tragic death, there is a sort of uprising and a riot, and those riots start spreading around the country. And you're like, wow, that seems a little bit close to the bone, doesn't it? So this sort of Cassandra-like effect that James was having in the writing of it seems to be continuing on. But the task we set ourselves from the very beginning, my initial idea for it was, I remember, seeing the pictures of the little boy drowned on the beach. I can't even think about it without, coming to tears. But and that period, so we're going back a ways now, but that period of time where the ugliness of attitudes that were sort of fermenting around immigration and refugees, and the mixing up of all that, and that was already sort of there, and I just had a very basic, simple idea, which was, what if we could show that in reverse? What if we showed a British family who had to suddenly leave their home and go across the channel? And so my original idea was to have it as a sort of very middle-class English family. We don't know why they're leaving their home. They suddenly have to, and we're sort of with them, and we can't really see. We don't pull out to find out what's going on, and we just go on this very sort of subjective journey with them. But then we talked to Adam Curtis, because I thought, well, who would be good to talk to about how might this happen? What would it take for Britain to be in that situation where families might have to do that? And so I thought, being a big fan of Adam's work in his documentaries, particularly around the idea of power and where power actually lies and how power is revealed and how power can hide itself and then is revealed in certain ways, I thought it'd be worth having a chat with him. And after that, I felt like, well, it really is worth pulling out and seeing what this is. That's the braver sort of challenge. But the big thing was, well, how can we make it believable? The rest of the drama depends on really believing that things have fallen apart. So how can we do that? And that led us eventually to thinking, well, it needs to happen in a place that has a history of uprising that's sort of laying dormant, that they're the sort of ghosts of the past. And so, you know, growing up in Port Talbot, I was 14, 15 when the miners' strike was on. And so the sense of a place, and across that sort of South Wales Valleys area, sense of a place that has had great injustice done to it in many ways, and yet the kind of fight doesn't seem to be there in the way that it was, but maybe the ghosts of that fight are still there. And if something was a kind of an inciting catalyst to spark that off, then that could all come out. And that's what led us to think about Port Talbot and the steelworks. And in fact, I mean, extraordinary, today, the last boat has arrived in the docks at Port Talbot for the steelworks, the last boat. There will never be another one. And to drop off the stuff. And the first blast furnace got shut down, I think, a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And the next one's going
That's
in
sad.
another week. Yeah.
Do you feel sad? I feel
Yeah,
sad.
I was sat in a cafe yesterday. There's a thing called the Docks Cafe, which is in a sort of little industrial area just down the road from the steelworks where a lot of the workers go. And I was doing some filming there. And the women who work there told me that it's, you know, tomorrow will be the last ship. And they said, you know, we have men sitting in here crying at these tables. And I mean, you know, I've known that it's happening, and I've said all along, you know, it's not a surprise, but it's a shock. But then to sit there and be told that yesterday, I was just absolutely devastated. I can't get my head around it at all. And yet we've lived with it for years and years and years, and that was partly why we chose it to fulfill the function that it did in the way. Because we've known the direction of travel for a long time, and the idea that it could be a tinderbox and that people could be drawn to it and then, you know, everything explodes was from that. But it was in order to then explore some other ideas about the nature of fracture in this country, division. Is there the possibility of coming back together? The idea of refugees and immigration. But again, it was the overwhelming thing to begin with was, can you use the power of what drama can do, which is to invite an audience to look out from behind the eyes of the characters, and the more characters, the better. And I suppose that's another interesting thing about watching Mr. Bates and a lot of the sort of dramas that we're thinking about. There is a tension, again, for me. So having played a lot of real-life people, I have to decide, when I get sent the script, I look at the script, and I have to decide, because I think, you know, the idea of what is your responsibility to the truth and the real people who are involved and all that kind of stuff. When I read the script, that's the point at which I have to decide whether I think this is a responsible story to tell. Is it being told in a responsible way? Because once I agree, and all I can think about is the character I'm playing. So there is a tension between the kind of journalistic nature of the drama and then the creative nature of playing a character. I have to let go of whether someone's done something terrible or not. You know, if I'm playing the character, I have to be in that character. I can't.
Right. Well, I've got a question now.
Right.
How did you find Andrew?
Well, that's my question. Michael's gone and stole my question. Go on.
Well,
go
but
on.
this is what I'm sort of hinting at in a way, is that I am drawn. I'm not a journalist. I'm an actor. And so when I've got a character in front of me, it doesn't matter who it is, I'm looking to make that character as human as possible. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm asking to look for sympathy for that character, but I have to make them as human as possible. Otherwise, it's not drama. Now, there is an argument that, you know, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office isn't drama. Because how much did you feel like you were looking out the eyes of, what's her name, Paula Venables? You're not invited to do that. Now, that's part of its power. Part of its power and why it's had the effect that it had is because we see out of the eyes of the people who had wrong done to them. And so it you know, that gives it its power and gives it the
You're acting as a
outrage.
counterbalance in a way. You know, where the power has been in the wrong hands for too long. And it needs...
And nobody's thinking about those people, exactly, yeah.
So,
But from a true drama point of view, I think the challenge is that the drama, you can tell the success of a drama by how many people, how many of the characters the audience is able to look out from the eyes behind. So monsters and, you know, bad guys, good guys, all of that kind of stuff gets mixed up. And then somehow we get towards the nature of what it is to be human, fully human. Now, that is not necessarily what you want when you're telling certain kinds of stories. And there is a tension there. There's the possibility that Mr. Bates wouldn't have had as much effect on things if we'd spent a bit more time looking into the worlds of the people that's a tricky one.
Can I just pursue it one stage further? And sorry, this is not one of your. When you first read the script for the Andrew one, and you must have, at that stage that you read it, you say to yourself, or do you? Because I'm thinking about cases that I have to take on or I don't have to take on. There are choices to be made.
Yeah.
And the question I've got in mind is that, what was it about that script that drew you into the question of portraying this person through the eyes of this person? Because you felt there was a need to do that, or?
Yeah, I felt like there was a story here that there was a number of things. One of the things was this story is in danger because someone can throw money at something in order for it to go away. There is a danger, and because of the way our media works, the news cycle and all that kind of stuff, there is a danger that this story and the people that it's really about can just be brushed under the carpet, And because Andrew's mum was able to throw our money at it, it didn't go to court. So there was no court case. So that leads to two things. One, we don't know what happened. There's a mystery at the heart of that story. This is about the interview between Andrew and Emily Maitlis about his relationship with Epstein and trafficking and that kind of stuff. We don't know what happened. So I'm reading this script, and obviously for legal reasons, you can't, in the writing of that script, you can't say that he did or didn't do something that we don't know. So there is a mystery, an ambiguity there.
But is there part of it, you don't have to give it away, sorry, what am I doing? Is there a part of it in which the person who wrote the script, it's obviously not just a pure verbatim reproduction.
No, exactly. So that's what I'm getting to.
So there's a bit of it where you're creating, presumably, or you're translating it, somebody's writing it, the feelings Andrew must have had, why he was doing this interview, what he thought he was doing.
Yeah, so it goes in.
So you're going to have to...
Absolutely. The main characters are... Because there's been another piece about the same story, but in that story, Andrew and Emily are very much secondary characters, supporting characters. It's not about them, it's about this other character. In our story, it's very much about them. So you have to... Emily's the exec producer on it, she's the advisor. So the Emily side of it, we know exactly what was going on. And funnily, it'll surprise you to know, Andrew didn't tell me what was going on. I didn't get to meet him. So there's a lot of guesswork, but, educated guesswork. But this thing, at the scripts, when I read the script, that's at the point where I can read it and go, right, I feel that this is an appropriate story to tell, being told in an appropriate way. That's my responsibility bit of it. But once I've agreed to it, and I'm playing Andrew, I have to let go of all that. And then I have to just make this person as real as possible, and the danger is that in my attempt...
You do it better than he did.
Well, maybe I'm too good an actor, Michael. Because, obviously, I would hate it if people go, well, you've made Andrew very sympathetic. In that. Of course I don't want to do that. I mean, when I did Frost Nixon, Frank Langella, who played Nixon, in America, everyone was like, well, I think it's time to revise our opinions of Nixon. This film has made us feel sympathetic towards him. We're like, that's not what we were trying to do. But the very nature of drama is that it's sort of asking you to see things not as black and white and a bit more grey, and it's not quite, So that's why I'm saying that the more... If Mr. Bates versus the Post Office had been possibly a better drama, it might not have had the effect that it had. The fact that it was... in some ways, much more straight lines, black and white. This is what happened, and then this, and we're only seeing it from this point of view, and everything looks a bit like Bake Off. It's like that worked. It worked really well, and it really got people upset and angry, and it made change.
And it was a necessary preface to the actual inquiry, which has also been televised.
Right.
So you've seen the characters, real life, being played by themselves.
Yeah.
And if you reflect back into the drama, it all makes sense.
Yeah.
And so therefore the drama has prepared people in a way that perhaps they might not have been quite so interested in.
Yeah.
In the inquiry which goes on day
Well,
after day.
I didn't think, when I watched Mr. Bed, I didn't think I was going to spend so much time going, ooh, Snowdonia is beautiful, isn't it? That is not something I expect of, but it certainly makes it lovely to watch, you know, and it keeps you in there, and, you know, so it's very clever the way it's done. I mean, you know, I'm thinking about, so the Birmingham Six, and, you know, the role that World in Action played with the Birmingham Six. So, you know, Chris Mullin, who then was working for World in Action, later went on to write the book that A Very British Coup was based on, which is another big influential
And the Birmingham, Who Bombed Birmingham has just come out again.
Right. Now that is something where the film that Chris Mullin was involved in for World in Action actually was a big part of the campaign that actually led to them being released,
that's part of the group I was talking about, of investigative journalism, some of it pure drama, some of it actual looking carefully at cases, has disappeared. Because people are afraid, perhaps less so now. So the base thing's opened another door whereby people feel emboldened to tell the story, whereas they might not have. And so that shows the extent to which there is a public conscience. And in a sense, that's what we're both talking about, is a public conscience that you can, you know, get a grip on and translate it into one's own life. And that's what I've tried to do in the cases that I've done, certainly.
Yeah. Michael, as an actor, as a director, do you want to make some dramas like that? Would you want to be involved in those that have a really strong message like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're looking for a combination of things, aren't you? On the one hand, I'm particularly drawn to the kind of things that we're talking about. So big picture-wise, injustice, you know, when there's, you know, an unfair situation, and you can draw attention to it. You know, so it's about ideas, it's about that sort of big picture stuff. But at the same time, you want something that draws you in with the characters, that you feel is human and you're somehow relating to. So something that's just polemic is not as interesting. I mean, it has its purpose and it can work really well. And something that's just about a sort of very domestic, I say just, something that's on a very domestic level about a drama is also, you know, great. But I'm looking for a balance of the two, really. That's what draws me in. And it's funny, I was thinking about what were the first things that I watched that kind of first hit me in that kind of a way, you know, and I was trying to think what it was. And then I realized, of course, it was Grange Hill. Grange Hill. Phil Redmond, Grange Hill, then did Brookside. You know, I think in some ways, like Russell T Davies is in that tradition, where you take a very popular, accessible form, so it's like, you know, Grange Hill, Brookside, soap operas, that kind of stuff. And then you introduce things, you deal with subjects and issues that are really difficult things to deal with, but it gets to a mass audience, and you've got people. Yeah. So it was Grange Hill that did it for me.
Well, I'm just thinking as you spoke, because I call myself a child of the celluloid age. And I mean, I got into this by watching a television series nobody can remember now except me, and that's The Defenders, which was an American series, actually amazing. And I thought, ooh, I might be able to do something like that, but I wasn't sure. But the film that got me, I remember watching it in a corrugated iron hut in the Channel Islands, because they didn't have a cinema proper, To Kill a Mockingbird. And I thought, oh my God. And I didn't know about the issues. It was news to me, and I sort of watched it and thought, that's it. That's something where, you know, there's a need, and I might be able to do that. I didn't know that I could. But, and so again, it's the visualization that brings it home. Well, to me anyway.
Well, so it was watching on TV what I realised was Grange Hill, but the real power of what storytelling can do. The thing that really, the very first experience I had, I was in a youth theatre, the West Glamorgan Youth Theatre, and the first course I got onto to do, I was, I think, 13, 14, and they do a Christmas course and a summer course. And the summer course, the older students would come back from university and put on a show. So I didn't get onto the summer course. I was still a little tiddler. And all the older kids came back. And they were doing a production of The Crucible, Arthur Miller's play The Crucible.
All right.
And they had rehearsed it the year before, and then it got called off because there was a big snowfall. It was 83, I think, 84. And so they were coming back to do this production of The Crucible. So they sort of knew it already. And I got onto the course as a stage management student. I didn't get on as an actor. So I was told, right, you come and sit in this room now, in this little rehearsal room, much smaller than this room, sit here cross-legged on the floor, and the actors are going to do a run-through of the Crucible. No costume, no lights, it's just, the tape marked on the floor, and they're going to do a run-through of this play, and you sit here and watch it because you're going to be working on this, so it gives you a chance to watch it. I'd never seen a play before at this point, and so I just sat there, little 14-year-old, watching this play, and The Crucible is a play about injustice. I mean, talking about unfair. I sat there and I watched something where people were being wrongly accused of being witches, in this case, or in league with the devil, and the injustice of it, and the unfairness of it, and the looking out through the eyes of all the charactersness of it, it just blew my mind. I changed. It literally changed the networks going on in my head, and the power of that story.
The Crucible.
The Crucible, yeah. The power of that story, but particularly the power of watching something where something unjust is, like that Monica Dola moment, where you're seeing it happen and you're experiencing it through the characters. You're not just being told about unfairness, you're experiencing it. I'd never experienced anything like that in my life. And I knew from the moment that finished, I was like, I want to do this with the rest of my life. That's what I want to do. And it wasn't, and I think, up until a certain point in my life, I would have said, what I meant by that was I want to act. But I don't think it was. I think it was, I want to tell those stories about that happening. Yeah. So it sort of infected me in a way that I haven't really fully understood sort of until this point in my life, really. I would have used that as a story for what made me want to act. But actually, I don't think it is just that it made me want to act. It made me want to address that and do something about that. And acting was the pathway for it at that point. But at a certain point in my life, it opened up into other ways as well. But
it made you feel something, isn't it?
And Miller I think, is one of the greatest playwrights of all. I would say Shakespeare and Miller, best people who've ever written anything, I would say. And all of his plays are about that in some way, about some kind of injustice, someone searching to retain some kind of sense of dignity in their soul in a context that is broken. That's the thing that people don't, I think, talk about as much with Arthur Miller, in the same way as you were saying. People recognize that it is broken. The way we live is broken. It doesn't work. Now, listen, it may be the best way we can come up with at the moment, but it don't work. And all our dramas and all our injustices are picking up the pieces from a system that is broken. And what government can't do or won't do, everyone else has to take up the slack. And that's sort of what we're dealing with in these stories.
I think that's going to continue, because what I'm watching at the moment, I'm watching closely to see whether promises are going to be kept. But you can see the agenda that's already being set. It's a difficult one, but we have to face it, I think, together. And that is, they're going to be saying, well, look at the mess that we've been left, the hole, it's so deep, we can't get out of it. So sorry, bigger, higher taxes. Yeah, I know we did say we wouldn't, but, look at the hole. Now, it's missing the point, if that's what we're going to face, another round of what we've had before, many times over. It's going to compound the felony, in a sense, that's already being committed. And what they should be thinking about is lifting us out of it, not by raising taxes or the winter fuel. It's interesting who gets hit the hardest. It's not the people on yachts, I'm afraid to say, at all. It's not the people with foreign bank accounts. It's not the people, and I heard some interview the other day saying, well, we can't discourage these people, they bring us wealth. No, they don't bring us wealth, they bring themselves wealth. Their wealth is invested elsewhere. So,
and the frightening thing is, I think, is that when the choices we have politically are between this lot who'll tinker around the edges or this lot who'll tinker around the edges. Yeah. When someone comes along who actually threatens to make real change, all the levers, all the apparatus comes in to get rid of them. It doesn't have. That's what Chris Mullin wrote about in A Very British Coup. The idea of, someone, Ray McAnally plays a Labour guy who becomes a politician, sort of more left-wing politician who becomes a prime minister, and you see how all the establishment comes together to get rid of him. I worry when I look at Starmer. Obviously I don't want the Tories in anymore, but I do worry about someone who comes in and you go, are you just going to tinker around the edges? I mean, it needs fundamental change. I've just spent the year playing an Iron Bevan. Where is someone who has the kind of the balls and the vision to reimagine this, because it all needs reimagining.
Michael, what else do you think drama can do, though? Because lots of your cases have been dramatised.
Yeah.
Stephen Lawrence, there's been many different depictions of that story.
Yeah.
What other cases do you think that could work really well with the drama treatment?
Well, I think Nick Kent, who I've mentioned already, made a sort of habit of reconstructions, and I never thought they'd work because they are, and I know you've done one in a way, so you've mentioned it already, and I thought, are people going to want to sit through a reconstruction, which is verbatim, but I was just explaining before I came in that one of the ones I went to and watched was so compelling, and people were shocked by what they heard from the evidence, because the evidence is shocking in these cases. That when at the half of the interval, the judge on stage said, "All stand," not meaning the audience. I stood up because I found myself back in the inquiry and all the rest of it. So I think the role of reconstruction and the role of portraying a case verbatim is an important one, along with dramatising it as well. And in fact, there are a lot of cases that require that. I mean, the Malkinson case, which is probably, you're all familiar with it. That's another one. The stories can always be told, and I think there's no better, way of doing that. And I'm hoping, for example, Grenfell's ripe for it. And there has been a sort of documentary so far, but I think the documentary is fine, but I think, again, a dramatisation inside the lives of some of these people who are, as you may recognise, devastated, still are devastated. You don't, when you dramatise it and show to people through the lives of those who've survived it. And in fact, I think, yes, I went to see a play about Grenfell, which was taken from, it was done at the National, and I've just forgotten its name for this now. I think it's just called Grenfell. And what got me on this, I have to say, I couldn't see it all because I had to go home. I live out of London now. And the play was a remarkable, and some people didn't like it, but I thought it was fantastic. And they had a cast of actors, but they were all dressed ordinarily. There were no props except cardboard boxes. And you began to realise that the cardboard boxes were meant to be the tower blocks. And so particular actors in particular roles got onto the box, almost like the old days in Hyde Park and Speaker's Corner, where you'd have a box to stand on. And the play was the tension between the various characters on the various cardboard boxes, and it actually got you to think quite differently about the people. And it reminded me of another theatre company which we've talked about. It's called Shared Experience, and it was run by somebody called Mike Alfreds. And they used a theatre that I helped set up in North London to rehearse before they went into the West End of London. And I used to go and watch their rehearsals because, again, they used no costume, no props, and they weren't doing plays. They were doing novels, like Bleak House, which is about injustice, set in legal London. And I wonder how they're going to translate a novel into a play which makes sense. They did it, it was a long play as they did it, but they didn't have scripts. They'd read the book inside out, obviously the novel inside out. They knew what Dickens was trying to say in his various characters, and of course he chose his words very carefully, particularly the names of characters. And without all the trappings of theatre, if I can put it that way, you suddenly got through to what was the truth that was going on. So I think the theatre has that role of stripping it away. And I think, so your question was, what other ones? Well, Grenfell is one. I hope there is going to be, a representation of that, like the Postman.
Yeah. And I think as well as the stories that can be told, what's exciting, I think, is the medium in which they can be told as well. So, for instance, I think one of the most exciting developments over the last few years in terms of storytelling is podcast series.
Oh, yes, yeah.
I mean, series like Shreds, Kerry's here who did it, John, that it's about John.
Oh,
John is here tonight.
Matin, of course.
Or Matin, exactly, Injustice of Hangman. it's an extraordinary, powerful medium, I think, and a sort of much more direct way of telling stories. Obviously, cheaper than doing a big TV series as well. But I think that's a really exciting development. I mean, I felt like Shreds was one of the most powerful ways of telling a story I'd come across in years and years and years.
And it can protect people's identities as well, because what we've got to be careful of, that it's not sensational and it's not exploitative as well. And I think a podcast allows people to be willing to take the risk to speak about it, because some of these things are extremely hurtful, extremely painful and very traumatic. And podcasts, as you say, is that medium in which more people can become involved and be willing to be involved.
And it can also, I suppose, I mean, I'm sure it takes a long time, but it can come out, it can be more immediate, I think.
Yes.
It can be more quicker to respond to things. You know, that was one of the other things I was looking at when I was looking back over the kind of history of this sort of genre, is how long it takes to be able to put on a TV series or a film about something that's happening. How much can it still, how much can it affect change? I mean, the Mr. Bates, I think, finishes in 2019, doesn't it, when the cases get overturned. So the other extraordinary thing about Mr. Bates is that even though it comes out, it was seen and broadcast 5 years after the kind of high point of the story and when the story ends, it still created change, which is, you know, amazing. But a lot of the other things that we're talking about come out so long afterwards, you wonder how much it can help. I don't know. I think in terms of the immediacy of storytelling and how that can be a powerful weapon. On the other side of it is, you know, time is a weapon that could be used by the powerful, because you draw things out and you make it take so long, and of course it's very connected to money as well. So the longer it's drawn out, the more it costs for people to, you know, to try and get their voices heard and try and have their story told. I mean, I think about Orgreave. I mean, how long that has gone on for, you know, and on, and, you know, the same with Hillsborough. The fact that the families and people have kept going and kept going and kept going, when the weapon is to slow it down, make it go through this process and that process, so that people just eventually give up and can't keep going, either can't afford to keep going, or die, or don't have time to keep going, you know. One of the tools that we've got as storytellers, I think, is to try and get the immediacy of get the story out. Let people know what it is, so that people can get worked up in the way they did about Mr. Bates, you know. And that's why I think it's exciting to see new mediums coming through and people, you know, switching onto that and getting these stories, because that's our weapon. Their weapon is to slow everything down and make sure that we ultimately, our anger just fizzles out, because you can't sustain it. Ultimately, it turns against yourself, doesn't it? Unless it can be channeled into something that helps. So we, as storytellers, I think we have to find new ways to get the stories out there and get them in front of people, so that it can have that kind of galvanizing effect.
Definitely. We're going to stop for about 5 or 10 minutes for a quick Q&A. So I've got 2 helpers at the front who are going to pass the mics around.
There's loads of amazing points, so thank you so much so far. Just on about the immediacy of getting stories out. And I think, obviously, the first thing we all think about is censorship. And when you see what's going on at the moment in the courts, with all the different companies like X and Facebook and Meta, etc. What's your thoughts on censorship?
Well, it's become such a thing now, isn't it? It's such a kind of weaponized phrase, freedom of speech. You hear freedom of speech being talked about in all kinds of ways now, and there's a sort of war going on, a literal war of words, isn't there, around who can, like there's a real far right way of being able to go, we stand up for freedom of speech. And we also sort of want freedom from consequences. So it's just interesting, the idea of censorship. And because there are different forms of censorship, aren't there? Talking about the stories that need to be told, it's going to be really interesting. I'm not sure when it comes out. I think it probably will come out next year now. But there's a drama that Jack Thorne has written. I think it's called Mandrake, about the hacking scandal. Now that's going to be really interesting, because that is, there's a form of censorship, which is if the media just doesn't want to report something, is that censorship? Or is that just editorial decision making? If your press is very heavily weighed towards one particular political ideology and they decide they don't want to report on a certain thing, is that a form of censorship or not? But but that's where we live. That's the, you know, we're getting our news from certain places. Now, obviously, there's a different form, different ways of getting our news now. But if there's unregulated places that we're getting our news from, it's starting to get quite dangerous, that whole side of things. So this fight that's going to go on now, which I'm sure we're going to see a lot of over the next few years, around the ideas like censorship and freedom of speech and that kind of stuff, it's lots of different versions of what that is going to be battling itself out. I mean, I don't know what you think about all that, Michael.
Well, a lot, actually. I mean, it depends how long you got. An example recently is the woman aged 77 who's been sent to prison for 18 months. She hasn't done anything violent. She was objecting to... It's part of the Stop Oil campaign. And the courts at the moment are acting illiberally in a very bad way, in my view. Namely, they're preventing certain defendants from explaining to juries why they have done certain things. And extremism is a word, of course, which you can spread across a whole spectrum of views and so on. Now, I find that very concerning. That's where it starts, and I think there is a line that has to be drawn. So a government should be entitled to step in where that's happening, but not the rest of the gamut of the spectrum. So I think at the moment the pendulum swung the other way so badly that actually we've lost a grip on it until you get a government that's aware of the values there to start, a Labour government to start talking about terrorism within speech, I think is a dangerous omen. So I would be opposed to that. So you can see there are gradations here that have to be looked at very carefully.
I had a question, basically. I want to know where you consider, like, dramatisation to... where you think it's a good thing and where it kind of stops.
To try and address what I think you're asking about, the power of feeling that came out of, you know, Mr. Bates. The number of people watching that and how strongly people felt, and therefore it led to change. What if it was a lie? You know, what if there was a drama that was purportedly about something that actually happened? What I'm getting to is, it is powerful. It is a powerful thing. Storytelling is powerful. And you can see when it's as a form of good, let's say, you know, Mr. Bates versus the Post Office is harnessing that power for good. It's addressing injustice, it's addressing terrible travesties that have happened and helping to make good that. That is amazing. But what if that power was used for bad? So, you know, to ask people to, and there's nobody really, I don't know, dramatically speaking, you know, unless you get into legal issues, and of course there are a lot of, everyone's very careful about legal issues when you're telling real stories. So there's a lot of like, oh, we've got to be careful of that, and we can't do this, and we can't do that. But within that, there's still a lot you can do to make people feel very strongly about something, when maybe it's not necessarily based on fact, and nobody's really policing that. There's no one who can stop that in a way. You can have someone respond to it and say, well, that's not true. But in some ways, the damage is already done. You put it out there and people respond to it. So it's a powerful tool. You know, some of the most controversial aspects of things that I've been involved in, so let's say, for instance, the film The Queen and the film Frost Nixon, they are both written by Peter Morgan, brilliant writer, both about real events. Both contain scenes that did not happen. And the scene in each one that was one of the most talked about scenes in each one were scenes that did not happen. So in The Queen, there's a scene where Helen Mirren playing the Queen meets this stag, and the stag sort of represents different things to different people, and you've heard people talking about this stag, and they're trying to kill it, and you know, in some ways, some people felt it represented her relationship with Diana in some way. Some people felt it represented her relationship with the royal family or herself. There were lots of things. Anyway, it never happened. She never came across this stag. But it was one of the scenes that people, you know, felt the most about. In Frost Nixon, one of the most powerful scenes in that, one of the scenes that people most, you know, responded to was a scene where Nixon drunkenly calls Frost one night, and they have a conversation on the phone. and it kind of galvanizes Frost to kind of change his tactics, and eventually leads to him sort of, you know, achieving a kind of gotcha moment with Nixon. Never happened. Didn't happen. But in both cases, Peter felt, and I think we all felt in making the films, that it was a lie that was telling the truth. So it was something that was made up and invented that was trying to express some sort of truth that was in the story. Now that is something that is really difficult to know where the line is. At what point are you straying so far from what actually happened that it's now irresponsible in terms of an audience will just, you know, accept that what they're seeing is the truth. If you're told this is a true story. So it's very hard to know where that line is. There are certain legal lines. I mean, when we did The Damned United, we were halfway through filming. We hadn't done any of the Leeds United stuff yet, and we got told that Leeds United had said, you can't use our name, you can't use our images, you can't use any of our branding, our kit, or anything. Well, we can't make the film then, can we? But we couldn't, you know, we had to get their permission. There's just no way around it. We managed to do it. But you know, there's certain, when we did The Deal, the very first time I played Tony Blair, we kept being told, well, Cherie Blair is the most litigious person in the world. She will come at you if there's anything. So we were, you know, you have to really be careful with that sort of stuff. But dramatically speaking, there's an area that doesn't get policed like that. It's a line that you have to, the people who are making the piece have to decide for themselves if they're straying too far. And you have to be careful because it is really powerful what it can do. So it is difficult to know where that line is, I suppose.
Unfortunately, we're going to have to stop the Q&A. We've
I just got on silent. There's just one line. Propaganda.
One line, Michael, now. One line.
Talk about censorship.
I've got to keep you on a tight leash.
I'll rest my case, yes. No, I'm just going to say propaganda. That's where it stops. For me, just a line, that's all. It's one word, that was all right.
Well, thank you all so much. I've had a lovely time talking to you both. Have you all enjoyed it?
Yeah.
I don't know about you guys out there, but I'm sensing that maybe with the right project, both of you could come together and, you know, make something happen. I mean, would we want to see that?
Well, I was saying to Michael earlier when we were waiting to come in, I said, how many times have people played you? Because I know at least 3 times have people played you, but, like, you know, I'm taking notes.
Well, yeah.
Is all I'm saying.
Michael, what would you think of Michael playing you?
Oh, my God.
Would you like Michael to play you?
Well, now, this is a tempting question. Well, the thing is, you're so good at, you know, getting inside the person, you'd actually be rather better than I am myself. So I'd actually have to, you know, I think there's another actor comes across my mind. I mean, David, what's his name? I want to be the 14th incarnation.
Listen, David Threlfall and David Thewlis are 2 of the best actors we've got.
Good comeback.
Those are the only Davids I'll talk about.
Oh, well, thank you so much. It's been great. And thank you all for coming. Michael will be signing copies of The Power in the People, Not the People in Power, out in...
Thank fuck they're winding up.
Shut the doors, lock the blanket. That's the best final line ever.
If you would like to purchase a book, then there is an opportunity to do so. But I'd just like to say thank you both.
Oh, thank you.
It's been
Yeah,
great.
thank you, Danielle. Thank you.